Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are back with another roundtable with two of our most fiery guests to date, and also one of our longest episodes to date. For today's show, we are once again joined by Julius Hernandez and Preya Samsundar. If you haven't listened before, I'm sure you'll figure out which side of the aisle these two call home within the first minute of their remarks. With Julius and Preya, we're going to start by breaking down the drama surrounding the tragic deaths of director and actor Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele. We will then move into recent ICE raids and more than 400 arrests here in the Twin Cities through Operation Metro Surge. Then we will move into our favorite topics of late, fraud and 2026. On fraud, we will continue our conversations from last week, this time with a little spice from Preya and Julius, by breaking down the federal government's involvement, Walz's recent op-ed, and what Minnesota voters think of the handling of our fraud problem. We will then turn our attention to 2026, starting by discussing the results of the MN GOP straw poll for governor and moving into the chatter around a potential new candidate for U.S. Senate. I once again apologize for my voice and cough, but we can officially thank the joy of bronchitis. Thank you for joining us today and enjoy the show. We are back with what I expect to be quite another spicy episode. We have a lot of things to talk about today and a lot of things that I think our guests today will have some strong opinions on. I want to start today with the recent tragic news about Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele. They were murdered by their son over the weekend. He is obviously known for a lot of things. Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, so many things. You can't even, we could talk about him alone for this entire episode. But the real reason to talk about this is a post that President Donald Trump posted after the news. He talked about a very sad thing happened last night in Hollywood, and then goes into how Reiner was tortured and struggling, and that they reportedly died to their anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome. He was known to have driven people crazy by his raging obsession of President Donald J. Trump, with his obvious paranoia reaching new heights as his Trump administration surpassed all goals and expectations of greatness. Goes on, ends with, "May Rob and Michele rest in peace." Now, it's just icky. This is one of the things that I had a really hard time with when I was coming to the election in 2024 of, can I cast my ballot for President Donald Trump? And these are the things that just get in the way of everything. And my biggest frustration, before I get into it, I want to hear from the person who probably saw this and had the biggest reaction. Julius?
It's funny you say that, because it was the first time ever I looked at a post and was just like, okay, like, what do we, it's gross, it's disgusting, there's no need for it. It was like, of all the people in the world, Rob Reiner was the one that you go after immediately after he got brutally murdered by his own kid, by the way. Not a lot of information had come out, and he says he died because he had Trump derangement syndrome. That's not true, obviously. It just goes to show, like, the level of desensitization we have as, like, Americans now, that our president just, like, openly does, excuse my language, but really shitty things like this, where it's just like, are you really? This seems to be what the leader of the free world is focused on most right now. And it just, again, makes, like you said, Becky, when you're sitting in the voting booth thinking, like, is this someone I can vote for? It makes me look at Republicans and say, how could you vote for that? That's absurd. If any other American president in history had ever said anything remotely like that about a death of a celebrity as tragic as that, especially one that opposed them, we wouldn't even be talking about them. They'd be out of office immediately. The standards by which we have held elected officials the last couple of years is pretty gross, and this is just another example. But again, you're surprised, but also not surprised anymore, right? Like, there's nothing that Donald Trump could say anymore that would surprise me. And this was one that was like, it seems pretty extreme, but it's like, man, it's just what you expect now, which is sad.
Preya, you've worked for candidates, campaigns, parties. I always advocated for candidates or members I worked for to not have access to their social media accounts. Your thoughts?
I've lost that battle with a couple of candidates, but sometimes it's better to let it ride. I think Julius is right. Like, most Republicans agree with this sentiment as well, is that, look, this is not the time or place This is a horrific tragedy. And as my mother likes to say, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. That's probably a creed that we should live by. I think Julius has got a point in that it's not really shocking for the president to say these things. And so, yes, is it something that he should have said? Absolutely not. Are we kind of disappointed that he chose to do it? Absolutely. Are there Republicans coming out and saying that he shouldn't have done so? Absolutely. But I think, and I'm not trying to negate what the president has done in any way, shape, or form by saying this, but I just want to address Julius's point in that saying that Donald Trump is not the only person who has taken to social media to say bad things when people die. As we saw with Charlie Kirk, there were a lot of Democrats who did not show the same level of sympathy. And they all got away with it scot-free. And we've kind of seen that over and over again. This is a both sides of the aisle problem. This is not just a Donald Trump problem. Maybe Democrats are meeting Donald Trump's moment. I don't know. Two wrongs don't make a right either. But all of this is to say, regardless, is that Donald Trump should have followed my mother's rule of, if you got nothing nice to say, don't say it at all.
Well, can I just, sorry, Becky, I just want to push back a little bit because you asked for spicy and I also, this is the truth, but this is not just some Twitter troll. This isn't some random state legislator. This isn't some commentator from the Democratic side or the Republican side of the party. This is the president of the United States, right? There's a difference between, by the way, when people went on Twitter and said hey, good thing Charlie Kirk got murdered, it's sick, it's gross, it's disgusting. You're correct about that, and I agree with it. It's a both sides thing where we continue to have these issues of, someone gets brutally murdered or assassinated, whatever the case, and then people go and say really dumb shit. But the reality is, this is the president. This isn't a random person. This isn't some Twitter troll. This isn't a commentator or a pundit. And so the standard by which we're holding the president of the United States to is not equivalent to, some CNN pundit that might not like Charlie Kirk and says good or whatever. That's the difference, I think, here. And it's not, again, I get what you're saying and I agree with what you're saying. And I do think there's a case to be made about how this is an issue on both sides of the aisle. But ultimately, this is the president. And that is the key here. That's the leader of the free world, right? So.
And I think that's kind of why I did want to talk about it today, because for me, it is, we saw people get canceled and lose their jobs and have backlash, rightfully so, when they were celebrating or applauding the murder of Charlie Kirk. Now, is it apples to apples? No. Obviously, Charlie Kirk was murdered because of his beliefs and what he does and does. I understand that. But from my perspective, you can't defend or excuse Trump for being able to say this and be both applauding the cancellation of folks. Now, I agree. It's the president. He should be held to a higher standard. But for me, that's kind of where this stands. I think similar to how we've said, nothing is as bad as the Holocaust. Don't compare things to the Holocaust. Let's just have a blanket. We do not celebrate or wish or hope for people's death, nor should we celebrate or honor or applaud if somebody has died. Left, right, center, good, bad, ugly. It's just not, okay, aside from Saddam Hussein, I guess, or Bin Laden, those are two that I did, sure, celebrate. But I think aside from literal terroristic dictators who are responsible for the death and murder of hundreds or thousands or millions, I think it should be a pretty safe blanket. Michael.
First of all, let me applaud all three of you for offering a very humane, reasonable, and smart take on it from varying degrees and how you've approached it. I will say to you that it is not surprising. I have come to terms with my bar with the president, and as much as I want, and I've talked about this before, I didn't vote for him, but I want presidents to succeed, because if the president succeeds, even if I don't vote for them, the country succeeds. He's never going to succeed in doing this stuff. He is never going to rise to the moment. This is who he is. And I have come to the realization that Donald Trump is simply not a good person. That doesn't mean he can't accomplish things as president that are good, but he is not, I just don't think, a good person. And you see it when this type of situation happens. It is just ugliness. And I'm longing for the day that when we can elevate the role of the presidency again to where we understand that. I get the whole back and forth arguments about Democrats do it, and they do. This truly is, to agree with Preya's point, this is a both sides issue. There is rhetoric on both sides. But to Julius's point, and a little bit to Becky's point, he is the president, and that sets him off into a different bit of stratosphere. I wake up every day fully expecting him to say bad things. I don't wake up every day expecting him to do bad things. And again, there are policy matters in which I want the president to succeed because then our country succeeds. But this is just gross. And the world would be a better place if we all followed Preya's mom's advice about not speaking. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. And to think that we have to spend time discussing this, which we need to, is just a sad state of affairs. It also goes to a point, which I've said long ago, which is social media is just ugly. The older I get, the more I realize how appreciative I am that I grew up before social media was around. I don't say things on social media that I wouldn't say to someone's face. I wish others had that policy, but people need to get off social media, and this is unfortunate. The one thing I will say about complimenting people on the Republican side for speaking out, there are a number of people. But sadly, the Republican National Committee man from Minnesota doubled down and echoed and applauded Trump's comments. That is not helpful. I'm appreciative of the Republicans that speak out, but when people double down on that type of rhetoric, I don't think we should be rewarding that type of stuff. And to Preya's mom's point, if you don't have anything good to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. But you also don't have to comment every time the president does something bad and then jump in and say, I really stand by him. You don't need to do that every time. You can pick and choose. Let's be good people, damn it.
And I think this is a perfect opportunity of how all of us here can, again, when it's Democrats doing it, when it's Republicans doing it, do our part to kind of bring civil discourse back, bring good standards back, hold people accountable, call things out when it's bad, regardless of the side. So thank you for that conversation.
By the way, I'm glad you recovered. As you were saying, I would never cheer anyone. I'm thinking to myself, boy, I really cheered when bin Laden got it. And when bin Laden got it and when Saddam Hussein got it. Yeah. I'm glad you clarified quickly because I wouldn't want the Oppo file to be reflective of the fact that Becky wasn't upset when bin Laden and Saddam Hussein were no longer on this earth. But I'm glad you clarified the record.
Thank you. I try to keep things honest here.
That's good.
Moving into our next topic, here in Minnesota, similar to things we've seen across the country, there have been some recent ICE raids. Operation Metro Surge has been carried out here in the Twin Cities area, has been going on since December 1st. ICE reported that more than 400 undocumented immigrants have been arrested, including individuals with prior criminal convictions. We'll chat through a couple of those. There's been an article or two out there that lists folks of that. The Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin blasted Walz and Fry in this, saying that they failed to protect the people of Minnesota. They said that they arrested 400 illegal aliens, including pedophiles, rapists, and violent thugs. Since Operation Metro Surge began, they let these monsters, they being Walz and Fry, let these monsters and child predators roam free. Thanks to our brave law enforcement, Minnesota is safer with these thugs off the streets. And goes on to say, to kind of criticize then Walz and Fry for demonizing law enforcement for doing their jobs here. Preya, I want to start with you. What are your thoughts about ICE coming in, federal government intervening here in Minnesota, and the arrest of 400 individuals here in the state?
It's an interesting situation because obviously this is now targeting the Somali community as well, and we're seeing how that is playing out. Obviously, if you've broken the law, you should be arrested, you should be prosecuted, and then if you were not in this country legally, you should go back. You should be sent back to your country of origin. I think I look at this a little bit differently just because of my own background. Both of my parents are immigrants. My dad immigrated here 40 years ago, my mom over 30, and I understand and view America through their lens, which was they grew up in a very poor country and America was the dream. And coming here and fighting to get here legally and the right way was always the goal. And they came here and they made something of themselves, even though they didn't have much. And they instilled that in me as well. And so when I do see folks who don't take advantage of the opportunities they have, knowing what opportunities elsewhere look like, knowing that they have that opportunity that others around the world don't, who strive and pray for that every single day. I am very much of they should be sent back. There are so many people who are sitting here waiting legally to come into this country, who are trying to do things the right way and are waiting a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades to come into this country. Some of my own family have been on that wait list, and they're trying to do things the right way because they believe in honoring the law and following the law. But you have folks who come here illegally and then still behave the way they do when they were in their home country. And that is something I speak from experience of, because I do see it in the communities that I grew up in like my immigrant community, and hearing the stories from my parents, my grandparents, about what other enclaves of our community are doing in other places. And so I do agree that if you've committed a crime, a serious offense, and you get picked up and you're illegal, absolutely, you should go back, because you didn't take advantage of the opportunity that was afforded to you to try, even just try to do the right thing.
Preya, I really appreciate you sharing your personal insight. I think it's something that is an important part of this, and probably a more difficult topic, when it's not something that's as black and white for you based on your background, your experience, nor is it for me with being a little bit more of a moderate Republican. Before I go into what I hope and feel and think about the topic, Julius, I want to get your insight on this. I know that we've heard from obviously Walz and Fry on this. We also heard from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar that her son was stopped and questioned. He was released after he showed his passport, but Omar criticized the use of racial profiling because of this fact. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you see the videos, you see the kind of like just inhumane treatment of people. You see masked agents, who don't identify themselves jumping out of vehicles. And you can't help but wonder why that department now has a bigger budget than some militaries on this planet, and how they're using it and not following the law while they're doing it. Listen, you're not going to find a Democrat in this state, I don't think. There might be some crazy ones, but not a lot, not most of us, that would say if there's someone that has committed some very heinous crimes in this country that's here illegally, that they shouldn't be sent back. They should. There's no doubt about that. Listen, I grew up in a very rough neighborhood in Chicago, and I live in North Minneapolis now. Like, I know the effects of bad people on communities where people are already struggling, and you're not going to find anyone dismiss that, right? I think the mayor would agree with that. I think the governor would agree with that. But what you can't do is just deport people just because, or detain people and put them in detention facilities just because they look a certain way. You can't stop people without cause. And the reality is that the Trump administration, we know this is true because there's been a ton of reporting on this, that they're actually not deporting just illegal people who are here illegally that have committed crimes. They're not doing that. In fact, I got off the phone yesterday with a friend of mine that's a lawyer who said he was on the phone with a grad student who's married to a U.S. citizen who has her papers to be here legally, and she's being detained right now, and ICE won't let her go even though they have all those documents. So it's not just a small case-by-case situation that we hear of overreach by the government and by ICE particularly. It's a constant stream of treating people poorly, breaking people's windows. I just read a story yesterday here in Minneapolis where they pulled a pregnant woman out of her car and put their knee on her back while she was on the ground. That isn't, and again, what I want to go back to before I finish this point is, if it was a small number of cases of the government, of ICE overreaching and treating people poorly, you could maybe understand and maybe get away with it. But it's not. It's inhumane treatment of people that just simply look different in this country. I live in North Minneapolis. We have a pretty robust group of undocumented immigrants here who contribute a ton to our community. And I cannot explain to you how many times, I wish I could pull up all the text in a screenshot or something and show you how many times I've gotten a text at 5 or 6 in the morning saying, hey, ICE is 2 blocks down. And I have to worry about, as someone who is Hispanic, do I need to go outside with my passport because I just look a little different? I don't look white. And so I think what Trump is doing, what the Trump administration and what ICE is doing here with undocumented immigrants, with people who are here legally, and targeting certain communities like the Somali community, I think it's gross. I think it's sick. I think KTSP did a poll statewide. 56% of people disapprove statewide, by the way, disapprove of what ICE is doing in this state. And that's not because there's some misinformation about what's going on. We are seeing in real time that this agency is abusing their power and doing it while jumping out of cars with unmarked cars with no mask, or, with masks on. So listen, again, you're not going to find a Democrat, at least not a crazy one, that doesn't think people should be deported if they commit violent offenses and are here without documentation. But for the most part, that's not what's happening here in Minnesota. That's not what's happening here in Minneapolis. And if you're getting pulled over because you're a little darker, you look Somali, or you look Hispanic without cause, then that signals to me that there's something wrong with the system. And especially when you have such a large budget now, especially, you should be able to go through the steps of making sure that what you're doing is legal and within the bounds of the law. That's what I'll say here about that. I mean, I think it's pretty sick, some of the commentary on this stuff from Republicans, especially in this state, who know these people, who live day to day in the communities with these people, and know that most of them are not violent people that are coming here to steal our money and hurt us. That's just not the case. And the actions are not justified.
So I've got a couple points that I kind of want to talk about here. One to push back on, and then two just to offer some clarification on. So one, Julius, I appreciate your commentary on a lot of this. I think it's a little disingenuous to say that there are no Democrats that sit here and would say that they don't want to see criminal illegal aliens deported.
I said most of us do not. There definitely, I'll give you the point. There's the lefty weird DSA weirdos that do want people to stay here no matter what. I'll concede that point, but it's a very underwhelming group of people.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Minnesota was trying to be the first state in the country, to be a sanctuary state. We have Minneapolis and St. Paul and 8 other communities that are sanctuary cities, which means they do not work with ICE. They do not report to ICE if they detain somebody who is a criminal illegal alien. And so what that ends up happening is there are criminals, there are people who have committed murders, they have committed robberies, they're pedophiles, they are rapists who get arrested by our police officers, and then they are not handed over to the proper authorities to be processed and then sent back to their country of birth because they did not respect the laws of the land that they're trying to quote unquote get a better life in. That is a fact. So by that, in large, that means that a majority of Democrats who support sanctuary policies, who do not believe that we should be cooperating with ICE in the first place, and this is not just a Trump second term issue, this was an issue pre-Biden when he wasn't even dealing with immigration laws and just letting everybody in freely. This has been an issue for the last several years. And that is Tim Walz, that is Keith Ellison, and that is every other Democrat before him and Jacob Frey, who support sanctuary city policies. That is just a reality. Second, and I've actually had this conversation with my own family as we see the news of these ICE agents descending in Minneapolis. And the conversation we had is that when there are folks that come to this country, there's almost 2 different mindsets of immigrant families when they come into this country. There are the folks who say, I'm going to come to this country, I don't have anything, but I'm going to work hard, I'm going to mind my own business, I'm going to keep my head down, and I'm going to achieve the American dream the honest way. I'm going to work hard, I'm going to pay my taxes, I'm going to do everything right so I can achieve that dream for my family and set up future generations for success. And then there are another subset of folks who want to come to this country because they think the roads are paved with literal gold. They think that when you go into the backyard and we have fall, they think that means that you shake the tree and the leaves fall and that it's actual money. And I say this from experience because when I hear folks from other countries, the country my parents came from included, talk about coming to America, they talk about, oh, there's welfare, there's free health care, they're going to get free money from the government, they're going to get free groceries from the government, and they talk about all these things they want to do when they get here. That's not fair to anybody. And you know who will be the first person to tell you that that's not the right thing that they're doing? It is the immigrants who come here legally, rightly, who come here and they work hard, they pay their taxes and do the right thing, and then they hear friends and family and distant friends and family talk about how they're going to just come here and use the system for their own benefit. And I'll tell you, the folks who came here rightly, who came here and are immigrants who came here and did things the right way, they'll be the first person to tell you that's not fair. Not when they worked so hard to come to this country legally, when they came here to do the right thing. And that conversation was had both in context of ICE and what we're seeing with all the fraud right now. And Becky, I know you're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but some of it is cultural and it needs to be addressed. And I feel like it needs to be said because, of course, is what ICE doing, putting their knee on the back of a pregnant woman, is that an absolute right thing? No. Julius, do I agree with you that we should be handling things a little bit more professionally and by the book? Absolutely. But to not think for a second that some of this is an overreaction to years and maybe even decades of just ignoring the laws altogether, and for having Democrats going out of their way to obstruct federal law and federal law enforcement from doing their job in the first place and ensuring that these criminal illegal aliens were being taken off our street, you gotta wonder. And the reason I also say this is because you look at New Mexico, for instance. New Mexico took the unprecedented step of sending in its own National Guard into Albuquerque to deal with crime. And they did that for the purpose of, if we did it ourselves, Donald Trump and his administration wouldn't have to do it for us. And you know what? They're seeing the benefits from that. And so that's what happens when you kind of put your thinking cap on a little bit. And I know that I'm rambling a little bit, but I sit here and I have these conversations with my family and friends watching this going on, because you have to wonder, one, is this an overreaction to years of ignorance by Democrats who just did not want to cooperate with federal authorities? But also, is this part of a broader problem that we do need to address? And obviously we could have years and years of conversation on this, but just some 2 cents from the first generation American over here.
Well, so, I heard the phrase ignorance by years of ignorance by Democrats, and it just really set me off. Now I'm a little fired up, Preya. I don't know. But last time I checked, Republicans had a incredibly conservative immigration bill on the Senate floor last year during the election year that Republicans put out, authored by James Lankford from Oklahoma, who's one of the most conservative senators in the United States Senate, that was supported by Democrats, that would have gave the president of the United States the ability to shut down the border at his discretion whenever he wanted. It would have put money towards immigration judges to get the backlog of people that have applied and are waiting in their home countries to get here. It would have put an exponential amount of money not only into ICE, but into customs and border enforcement to deal with drugs, to deal with the inflow of people coming through the United States or coming into the United States illegally. And the last time I checked, the Republican president of the United States now, who was candidate back then, told his party to nuke it. And if that's not ignorance, I don't know what that is. That's pure and plain politics.
Bill was a non-starter from the beginning because it still allowed illegal immigration, which is literally the opposite point of it.
It allowed the government, it allowed the president of the United States to shut down the border whenever he wanted with no reason
Democrats could just,
if you want to talk to me about Democratic ignorance, you're going to also have to talk about Republican ignorance when that was the most conservative bill we've seen in the Senate for years, and it had Democratic support, and it would have passed the Senate, and it also would have passed the House.
Because it gave Democrats exactly what they wanted, which was a continued flow of illegal immigration into this country. It was a non-starter. I'm sorry.
It gave the President of the United States the ability
literally
to
had
shut
a
down
limit.
I want to hit another point.
All right, one at a time.
The amount of illegal, it literally gave a literal legal limit of how many illegal immigrants could flow into the country every single day before they closed the border. That was a non-starter, especially when Joe Biden was letting 100,000 illegal immigrants into the country every couple of weeks. That was just not going to be a starter for Republicans. That is why that bill got
conservative Republican in the Senate. Wait, and
he got lambasted for it. I'm sorry.
Becky, I just want to add one more point really quick. Yeah. To add to this point that Preya talked about in the beginning, this idea that immigrants are coming over, that people who are coming here illegally are committing, are here to take stuff and are committing crime at a higher, whatever the case, that's not true. The fact is that every study that you look into,
please don't sit here and tell me that my lived experience, I'm going to quote a Democrat here for a quick second. I'm going to be a Democrat here for a quick second. Please don't sit here and tell me that my lived experience is false, because I have spent 31 years that I have been on God's green earth sitting here listening to people talk about how they're going to come into this country illegally, how they're going to come in through Canada and walk their way across the border from the northern border to come into this country. And that is a fact. You can sit here and shake your head all you want, but I have literally heard stories. These are conversations that are having with family members and friends who are having these conversations over the years. They are having this conversation. It is not Americans who are having these conversations. I mean, they are American because they are legal American citizens now who came here the right way. But the reality is that these are not white Americans that are sitting here saying that this is a problem and that this is what is happening. These are immigrants who have come into this country legally, the right way, who sat here and fought hard for something that they desperately wanted, which was a better life in a new land, who came here, and they're sitting here listening to folks from their home country saying that they're going to shake the tree loose and try to see what they get. It is a reality. I've heard that conversation myself time and time again. So you can sit here and say, well, the statistics say all you want, but the reality is these are conversations that are happening in these communities day in and day out. And I promise you that nobody is sitting here from the communities that I'm talking to, the communities that I'm living in. They're not talking to Harvard and saying, yeah, that this is a real thing. Because you know why? Immigrant communities, they protect each other. They do, because they don't want to be seen as the bad guys. They don't want to be seen as part of the problem. They keep their head down. They go to their job day in and day out. They make sure their kids have a good education, and they set them up for success. That is what happens. They're not sitting here talking to Gallup, not talking to Harvard. They're not talking to the New York Times saying that this is actually what's going on in the community. And that is why you haven't figured out that fraud was actually happening for the past 10 years until this very moment.
If I could just finish sorry, Becky, if I could just finish my point uninterrupted.
Absolutely.
I just want to make the point here. You have 31 years of lived experience. I have 26. So, I mean, my experience is obviously much different than yours, but I grew up in a community made up of undocumented immigrants in one of the places in Chicago that has the most concentrated amount of people from another country that are undocumented in the entire country. All that to say, you can tell me what your lived experience is, and I can tell you what mine is, but I'm also going to tell you that the facts are the facts, which is that undocumented immigrants in this country commit substantially less amounts of crime compared to native-born U.S. citizens and Americans. That's just the reality, and this like fear-mongering about undocumented people in this country is based off of these false narratives that just aren't true, that the statistics and the lived experience don't add up with. And so my point I'm trying to make here is like, that's your experience. I'm glad to hear it, and I would never negate it. But mine is, and what the facts tell me also agree with mine, that the people that I talk to that are here, whether undocumented or not, are actually not committing crime, and they're not here stealing, and they're not here doing these violent things.
I didn't say all of them.
Okay?
I didn't say all of them.
I want to bring us back to this situation here with Operation Metro Surge, because I think that From my perspective, I kind of am a little bit maybe between the two of you, but I am with Preya in the fact that if people are here illegally and Julius, as you said, conducting violent crimes, they should absolutely be prosecuted and they should absolutely be removed from our country. Preya's point of sanctuary cities and sanctuary states is also something that I have an issue with because it does not always allow that to happen, nor does the prosecution and the judicial system that we have in this day and age. In this specific situation, among the 400 undocumented immigrants who were arrested, we have one from Burma who was convicted of third-degree criminal sexual conduct with force or coercion in Nobles County, one from Laos that was convicted of 2 counts of rape, one from Laos that was convicted of first-degree criminal sexual conduct with a child under 13. There were some very bad individuals that were arrested and will be removed from the United States in this surge. I do think that there is something that I support with sending violent criminals back, folks who came here illegally, who are not here to participate in society or do good for their neighbors. I have great issues with some of the conduct that we have seen of folks showing up for immigration court and getting arrested in other states, folks that are pulled out of the carpool line, picking their children up from school. There is something that is a major issue there. But it largely, from my perspective, also stems from our failures in our federal immigration policy. And Julius, you quoted the poll of KSTP, ICE operations in Minnesota. 41% of Minnesotans approve, 56 do disapprove. When it comes to federal immigration policy, it's about the same. Only 43% approve of our federal immigration policy, 53% disapprove. So there's clearly a lot of work to be done on that to make sure that it is those that want to come to this country do so legally, are good actors and participants in society. And, it's here, it's going on. I'm sure we're going to continue to see it. Michael, I want to get your perspective. But first, before I turn to you, I do just really want to thank you, Preya, and you, Julius. You have very different backgrounds from myself. You have very different experiences and stories and upbringings. And I am so grateful that you're willing to be here on this to share those with us, because it is very clear that there's only so much I can feel and say and think on this matter. You guys have way more to feel and think and say on the matter. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for having a conversation on this. Michael, before we close things out, I want to go to you, and then we'll get final words from Preya and Julius.
Yeah, I want to start off with the same way, Becky. I know this is a space for disagreement and a safe space for disagreement, but boy, oh boy, I am so appreciative of the fact that how both of you were vulnerable in discussing this issue and how it relates to your lived experiences. And I just want to thank you for coming on and talking about that and other issues that we're going to discuss. This is exactly why we have this platform. And it really helps pivot to my perspective on it. I'm a white guy from the suburbs. My grandfather came from Norway. I have a number of my grandparents came from overseas, from Europe, but I want to speak about my grandfather for a second. He came from Norway. He was a proud immigrant. He was born in Norway, came to the United States, and his family brought him here because they wanted, as I mentioned on the last podcast episode, that slice of that American pie, a slice of that American dream. He was a very proud Norwegian. We celebrated his Norwegian heritage, and on every Norwegian Independence Day, he would fly the flag. But he was also a proud American, and he was a proud Minnesotan, and he worked for the Department of Transportation for a long period of time at the state level. I think if I could offer, where I don't represent anyone other than myself, but this is where I kind of fall on the immigration discussion. And I'll be quick because I don't want to detract from anything you guys all have said, because it was just amazing. This is a problem. This is a both sides problem again. Republicans and Democrats, it is a failed immigration system. I don't want to see situations where legal residents of the United States, those who have applied for asylum, those who are seeking asylum, those who are here legally, although not citizens, are targeted. I don't want citizens to be targeted. The people that I think that the president has a mandate to do, is because immigration was discussed extensively during the last election cycle, is to ensure that illegal immigrants, especially those breaking the law and who are operating outside of the boundaries of the law, are held to account for their crimes. And I have to tell you, I was blown away by the list that Breitbart had organized. To think that there are 400, the people that they identified, undocumented immigrants with extensive criminal records. These are the poster child for how the system is broken. And I want to separate a little bit with each of the stories that you guys all have personally. There's a big difference between my grandfather who came from Norway and how he operated in the United States and how others are operating. And I think that there is, as someone who is a taxpayer, independent of the fact I'm a white guy from the suburb, I'm a taxpayer. And so the services, I do believe that the system is broken in so much that we do have a couple lanes of people that are coming here, and people are coming here because of our generous benefits. I want our state to be generous. But again, as other smart people have said in the ethosphere that I'm picking up on, every dollar taken away that goes to someone who doesn't get it, that's a resident of this state that should get it. And that means maybe someone who's here legally, who is legally seeking asylum. The system is clearly broken. What I also want to just draw a distinction on is this. A number of people that are arrested have been arrested because of protests and things that are going on. That I consider to be a responsibility in some ways of our elected officials to accurately portray what's going on. And I think this is also a both sides issue. I think that there is far more, and this is going to be a loaded statement, and I know it will, but when ICE is removing 400 undocumented immigrants who have committed a number of crimes, deviant crimes, the exact type of crimes that one of my family members could have been impacted by, I want them gone. I want every one of them gone as quickly as possible. Because think about how the criminal justice system and what will happen when a person is targeted by someone who is not here legally. When someone here is not here legally and they're violating the law and they're not operating in one of those lanes that Preya described, they should be gone. And so I want that to happen because I think we are a system of laws. And the only kind of connective tissue that we have with all these different backgrounds that we have is our ability to assimilate towards an understanding to the rule of law. I love my diverse neighbors. Okay, I loved hearing about my grandfather's past, and I have neighbors and diverse neighbors from a variety of all across the spectrum. But what I'm also challenged by is I think it makes no sense, and I think there's a huge problem of leadership where you want to claim that these ICE agents here. Now, let me be clear with you. And Julius, maybe I'm pushing back a little bit on you, but there is not a comparable list of 400 people that have been wrongfully imprisoned, wrongfully targeted in Minnesota like this. And I'm not trying to, and I'm going to say to you, as someone who campaigned against Donald Trump and someone who talked about the rule of law, the rule of law is legitimately important to me and how we follow it. And the rule of law isn't just democracy in the First Amendment, it's also law and order. And so I think it's a shame and it's a problem when ICE agents are out there acting. Now, let's tone down the rhetoric on something here. ICE agents are acting on lawful court orders that have been signed off by judges. These are not secret squads. And Julius, I would be the first one to speak up. And I want to say this to you, Julius, if you can provide evidence of repeated situations that have happened, but as I understand what's going on, and what I'm seeing a lot on TV is ICE is coming into cities. They're removing undocumented immigrants that are violating the law. Many of them are. And then what's happening is there are these protests where law enforcement is having to fend off legal court action. There is a place for this to be debated, and it's not on the street, and that's not the type of lawlessness I think should be going on. One last point I want to make, and I touched on it last week with Becky, that I started to go down the road, but I got distracted and I wanted to finish it. One of the things that I think that I'm going to assign to the Democrats a bit is that they have made it difficult for us to talk about immigration policy without being accused of being a racist. And I think, as someone who is a product of immigrants, I'm a second generation immigrant in many ways. Multiple of my grandparents immigrated here from foreign countries. and were not born here, but they came here because they believed in this country. I have just as much right to talk about immigration. The Democrats have policed language in such a way that you can't have an honest discussion about the boundaries of where we should be going for a policy without being labeled a racist or without being labeled a bigot. And I think we need to be having thoughtful, reasonable discussions about what's going on. I do not want pregnant women to have an ICE agent stepping on their back. I also don't want people disrupting ICE from doing the job that a court has allowed them to do. There is a process by which people can protest, raise concerns about police operations. But doing so in this manner, I think, is leading to more arrests that are unnecessary arrests, which I think is part of the game that's being played here. And it's very difficult. I will end on this point. If a television station or media outlet does a poll which says, do you support the fact that 400 undocumented immigrants have been arrested, including individuals with prior convictions, and detail those, and they polled on that, that is a 95-5 issue. And the only 5% is if the pollsters got a hold of some people in jail, because that is a gangbuster issue. And on that alone, I think that there is merit to what is going on here from an immigration perspective.
We do have a lot to get to. I want to let you both respond here briefly. If we can just give one last minute response, Preya, and anything discussed or any final thoughts on the ICE raids here in Minnesota.
Bravo, Michael. You just won your Republican card back. But in a serious note, I think you made multiple points that I couldn't agree with more. The reality is that there is a lot happening right now. These agents are just being obstructed. They are being taunted. They are being attacked for doing their jobs. And the reality is that if these individuals knew that it was a gentleman, or I don't even know that you would call him a gentleman, a man who raped a 12-year-old girl, and you have CARE sending a letter into court saying that he hasn't fully assimilated, that he's just responding to his culture. That is who they're removing, or that they're removing somebody who committed a homicide and is out on bail, or something to the effect of that. Would these people still be trying to obstruct ICE, or would they allow them to do their job? To your point, Michael, with the polling, a lot of this is just so very broad-based, and there is a narrative that is being pushed on television, both locally and nationally, that doesn't convey the full picture. And I think there needs to be a hard and honest conversation about what is actually going on in our country right now, what the objective is, what the goals are, and how we proceed moving forward. Because I think there is a lot of misinformation, there is a lot of sleight of hand, and that there is just a lot of, frankly, not a lot of truth telling when it comes to what's actually going on in our communities and going on in our country that needs to happen.
Julius, I know you have nothing else to add, but
Yeah.
we'll give you an opportunity anyways.
Yeah, I'm glad Michael got his Republican card back, and I'm glad Preya ended her part with truth-telling. So here's some truth-telling for you. By ICE's own numbers, 72 to 73% of the arrests they've made since Donald Trump has become president of the United States has been people with no criminal records or backgrounds whatsoever. By the way, it's also illegal for ICE to come into a city and not identify themselves. That is a law. That is a law upheld by the Supreme Court that you can go and do your research on if you want to. So no, I actually think it's pretty sick, and I think it's pretty disgusting when agents come in here with their masks on, not identifying themselves in unmarked vehicles without warrants for people who have committed crimes in this country, take them out of their cars, break their windows, kneel on pregnant women's backs. I think that's all gross. And it's actually contrary to what you're saying, which is that there is some merit to what Donald Trump is doing and what ICE is doing. There's none. When you say to the American people, by the way, that you won on, this is an issue that you won on, that you are going to get the most violent, awful people in this country out, and then almost 75% of those people don't have a single thing in their criminal background history at all, not even minor infractions, that's a lie. And you're using it to justify some pretty gross behavior by federal agencies that are actually going way beyond the legal limits they have when they conduct themselves in this city. Here's what I can say. And I'll finish with this, and I'll say, let's use Feeding Our Future, for example. there's been some pretty gross rhetoric by Minnesota Republicans and the President of the United States about the immigration enforcements happening here in the Somali community, as you mentioned recently, as December 1st, that somehow all the Somali people here, or a lot of the Somali people here, are committing fraud, they're stealing, they're doing all these things. Mind you, the feeding our fraud scandal was started by a white woman who was who was a citizen born here in this country. And out of 80,000 people in this state that are of Somali background and that came here after they were born in their home country, 70 people have been, convicted of crimes. So I think this rhetoric around around immigrant communities, around what ICE is doing, I actually don't think there's any merit to what they're doing. I think it's disgusting. I think it's sick. And I don't think they need a budget of over $120 billion to do what they're doing and harass citizens in this country. So if that's merit, on the landscape of immigration, then, you guys can go ahead and defend that. But let me tell you something right now. Minnesota Republicans like Lisa Dameth, who are saying ICE is doing a good job and who are begging for the president's endorsement in this state, get ready to get your ass handed to you in 2026, because it's not popular here in the city, and it's definitely not popular in the suburbs and out-of-state Minnesota. So if that's merit to you guys, and if that's what Republicans want to run on in 26, please, by the love of God, do it, because you will get your asses handed to you, just like you have for 26 years before, by the way.
Sorry, if I could just, I promise, I'll be like 30 seconds, Becky. I'm sorry. Number one, I don't think anybody on this podcast was advocating for use of force or anything else like that from ICE agents. As Michael, myself, even Becky said, the idea that an ICE agent put their knee on the back of a pregnant woman is not a great look. That should not be done. There needs to be more professionalism handled in that situation, absolutely. And if you think for a moment that there aren't going to be ads with criminal legal alien faces saying that they're raping 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old little girls being taken out by ICE agents, and that's not going to turn some heads in suburban Twin Cities or in inner city Twin Cities, you've got another thing coming.
Michael, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think this was, I'm really impressed by the conversation, and I'm very thankful to our guests. Let's move on to the next one.
All right. And I will say, I think that we will see immigration being used from both sides in the 2026. And we're going to turn to some of that conversation here now, starting with fraud, kind of a blanket fraud and how it goes into the 2026 governor's race, starting with kind of, again, staying on this federal government stepping in here in Minnesota. We have the announcement of the U.S. Department of Labor launched a strike team that's going to be coming into the state. They're going to be conducting a targeted review of Minnesotans' unemployment insurance program after all of the widespread fraud across numerous benefit systems. They sent a letter to Deed stating that concerns of recent reports of fraud, waste, and abuse might compromise the integrity of the state's unemployment insurance program. The letter went on to saying that because of the fraud they're going to be investigating SNAP, early intensive development and behavioral intervention autism program, and housing and stability services program, because that is where the fraud is conducted. And this, again, just kind of from my perspective, wearing my Republican hat, is a big highlight of the failure of Governor Walz here in the state to do a lot of things that the federal government feels that they need to step in. Now, I'm saying this as a girl who is a pretty strict constitutionalist in a lot of ways, that the states are supposed to do what the states are supposed to do. I believe that when it comes to fraud, that we are seeing a failure of our state government led by Governor Walz, and that is why we are seeing the strike team and other federal conversations where Minnesota is being tied up in this. Additionally, I want to say that there was a press conference today. House Majority Whip from Minnesota, Tom Emmer, called out Walz on this, said that Walz has had 7 years to address and stop the fraud. It wasn't until President Trump has made this a national issue that Walz started to pretend that he cares about his constituents' tax dollars supporting a terrorist group in Somalia. Accountability is coming, Governor. Our dishonest, failed governor must and will answer for his complete incompetence. Preya, what are your thoughts on fraud and Governor Walz and all this federal intervention here?
Let's be honest, the federal government has been eating the state of Minnesota's lunch when it comes to addressing fraud. They're the ones that are in front of the cameras every single day addressing a new a new fraudulent case that they're going to be prosecuting. I mean, obviously, this started even before Feeding Our Future. It's continuing now. We're seeing case after case, day after day. Fraud is not going away anytime soon. This is a complete failure of leadership, of basic project management, I think, at this point. Just I don't even know how to describe it. It's that big of a failure. On behalf of Keith Ellison, on Tim Walz, and basically every Democrat who has had control of state government for the last 20 years, because at the end of the day, can't blame Republicans for it because we had no control of anything. We weren't running state government. This was all on the shoulders of Democrats like Mark Dayton and Tim Walz, who have been in office for the last 20 years. That is the reality of it. I mean, the Washington Post said it beautifully, is that Minnesota has European style, I'm trying to remember how they phrased it, benefit systems that were rife for fraud because Democrats did not care how they spent the taxpayers' dollars. That is the bottom line. And if you need proof of that, just look at the past biennium when they raised the state budget by 47%. They squandered $19 billion in a surplus. And I am going to use the $19 billion number because just because state government decides they're not going to count inflation in that number and drop it down to $17 billion doesn't make it accurate. It was $19 billion they took from Minnesota taxpayers. And everybody remembers when Tim Walz sat here on Esme Murphy's WCCO Sunday morning program a month before Election Day and said, well, we're going to give that money back to taxpayers. Everybody's going to get a $2,000 check. But guess what happened? Who saw that money? Barely anybody. And I think it was, $500 that everybody else got? Meanwhile, where did the rest of the money go? Apparently to the pockets of fraudsters, because over $1 billion is being tallied right now in terms of fraud. And I don't think that the federal government has even scratched the surface of how deep this fraud actually goes. I think that it is far deeper than anyone imagines. I think we are going to have a boatload of cases, but even before Election Day, and it is going to continue on and on, because when you have a government that is so lax, that is so uninterested in protecting and being a good steward of taxpayer dollars, that you just fling money around like it is a black Amex card and you've got no spending limit whatsoever, because God forbid, if you run out of money, you can just tax the taxpayers even more. You're not going to do your due diligence. You're not going to make sure that these people are legit. You're not going to do the extra work to make sure that they've got a website or an actual office, or that their address isn't sending you to Lunds and Barley's or a Cub Foods. You're not going to do that extra work because to you, it's just money. It's just numbers. And that is how Democrats have treated taxpayers for the last 20 years. And that is why $1 billion is just scratching the surface of what this fraud is. And for Democrats to sit here and be like, we've done all this stuff on fraud, that's great. But the reality is that it wasn't Republicans who lost over $1 billion that's being used to buy second homes in Kenya, in Africa, that's buying G-Wagons that are being used in third and fourth homes. It's not buying Birkin bags that are being confiscated by the federal government in their prosecution cases. It was Democrats. You want to talk about where the blame lies? It lies solely on Tim Walz, Keith Ellison for not using the broad investigatory powers that he has to look in some of the shadiness, and Mark Dayton and everybody else before them who failed to do their job. That is the bottom line. And you want to talk about affordability on top of that, when prices are still high thanks to the crisis Joe Biden created, the Democrats created by raising taxes, and then they find out that in addition to Democrats wanting to raise their taxes because they squandered all the money in the surplus that they had, and they're talking about raising your taxes even more, they gave $1 billion for folks to buy Birkin bags and G-Wagons and second and third and fourth and fifth homes all day long. You really think the single mom in North Minneapolis is going to look at that and be like, that's the kind of governor I want for a third term? Sign me up. I don't think so.
We have seen that fraud has become a top issue for a lot of voters, according to that same KSTP poll. When asked how big of a problem is fraud, just about 75% said it was either the biggest problem or a major problem. It is something that we've been hearing a lot about, we've been talking a lot about, and it's sure, from my perspective, seems as though we are hearing more from Governor Walz in the last couple of days or week because of the federal involvement and because of the federal attention. And so now Walz is certainly upping the ante to trying to look a little bit more proactive, like a little bit more is being done or has been done. Julius, I assume you're going to disagree with me on that fact, but what's your thought on this and mine and Preya's, and we'll get to Michael here soon, putting this on Governor Walz?
I'm glad you brought up the KST people. I just want to break it down because I think it's very interesting. 25% of voters said it's the biggest problem. 54% said it's a major problem. Okay, fair enough. Has the governor done enough? 14 say he's done enough. 69 say he needs to do more. 18% unsure. Has the legislator, with a Republican speaker and a tie, done enough? 11%, and 74% say they need to do more. I think it's really interesting that Republicans are all of a sudden deciding that they want to absolve themselves of any responsibility of this issue. They did hold the House from 2015 to 2018, and they had the Senate from 2016 to 2022. And then the last time I checked, there's a fraud committee in the Minnesota legislature led by Republicans, especially one that's running for governor named Kristen Robbins, who KSTP just did a story on about how they've done absolutely jack shit about anything related to fraud in this. Oh, sorry. Yes. Language. Sorry. But have done absolutely nothing to address fraud in this state whatsoever since they've created their political committee that they wanted to put together. And I just think it's fascinating that Republicans all of a sudden are going to act like the governor is the only one who has his hands in this. Let's say, listen,
I'm going to pull rank here.
Wait, hold on. I want to finish this because I want you to pull rank with all the information I'm about to pull out really quick, or all the points I'm about to make, which is, if you are leading a committee that is meant to investigate fraud and you have the leadership of the House and you haven't proposed a single bill to create any sort of oversight for any of these agencies, it's political. That's all it is. And if you're going to blame the governor, that's fine. Blame the governor. But guess what? He put out a op-ed in the Star Tribune, giving all of the things he's doing to detail how he's going to address fraud. And for Republicans, it's too little, too late, and not enough. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, what has the fraud committee done? What has Lisa Dameth done? What has Kristen Robbins done? They're running for governor. They should have some solutions, and they should have some bills and oversight that they should have implemented, by the way, with a tie in the House and the leadership. Don't try to absolve them. I don't want to hear any of it because they have done absolutely nothing. Listen, you want to talk about fraud and Walz and Keith not doing anything? You're not going to find my sympathy with them when they've not handled this situation particularly great. But last time I checked, Minnesota Republicans have the Speaker of the Minnesota House, and they haven't done a damn thing. So,
Preya, I'll come to you in just a second. I'm real fired up at this moment. First of all, I'm going to start with simply, I didn't look at how this question was phrased, but I'm going to say with about 90% certainty that if you asked, has the legislature done enough? No respondent on this is saying is that Republicans or Democrats or whoever. It's just like Congress. Congress is always a failure.
But
Congress
you're in charge, but Republicans are in charge. They have the speaker and they lead the committee on fraud.
They don't have enough votes. We handled this whole
Becky,
thing.
You're going to tell me it's not
Republicans alone cannot pass their votes. You saying that the Republicans did not offer any bills or introduce any bills? We actually had Chairwoman Kristen Robbins on at the beginning of this legislative session. We talked to Jim Nash about his House file. I believe it's House File 3 that was about an Inspector General, about putting those
which was co-authored by a Democrat,
and crashed and burned because of the Democrats and the governor's failure to support that bill. So this is something I understand what you're saying. There is a fraud committee. I understand what you were saying about that recent article. We talked about that a little bit on.
By the way, in that article, she says they haven't done anything outside of highlight the oversight power that they have and haven't done anything legislatively to address it. If Republicans were smart, guess what they would have done? They would have offered a bill that says, I dare you to vote against to vote against fraud prevention measures in the state. And they haven't. You know why? Because it's all garbage. It's all political. And it's the only thing they've had
House
to run on.
503.
It's the only thing they've had to run, which was co-authored by a Democrat. Becky, what are you talking about?
But failed because of the Democrats voting against it and the governor failure to support. I'm going to come back to that op-ed because I think that op-ed, and to use your own language, is a bunch of bullshit. And this is how fired up I am getting right now.
Yes, let's go. I love it.
I think that Governor Walz is seeing the writing on the wall. He's feeling the internal political pressure. He is seeing the weight of the federal government coming down, and he's starting to say, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. He has his own whistleblowers. He has these folks from within his own agencies speaking up and saying, the fault of this is this. For the first time this week or the last 2 weeks, we have seen Governor Walz saying, it's my fault. For the first time in 2, 4, 6 years. Instead, we try to see him and the Star Tribune quibble over whether it's $1 billion or $240 million or whoever it is, and try to deflect and place blame elsewhere and that whole thing. Here's the deal. He is the executive of the state. Everything that is done under his administration technically is his responsibility. We didn't even get to in a recent episode because we had so many things to talk about. But the internal reports about how the lieutenant governor and the governor and their administrations and their offices and staff utterly botched everything that they were supposed to fix. They, between the credit card and reimbursements and mileage and spending in their offices and the safeguards and lack thereof, this is, from my perspective, what we talked about last week is largely a result of Democrats running this state, single party rule running this state, folks running in the same direction without checks and balances and thinking that everybody's going to be fine because they're all on the same side. They have the press on their side. The Minnesota people are on their side. And to be frank, there was no real Republican up against them. We have Republicans speaking out now. The federal government is coming in now. Things are getting done now because of these efforts. Preya, back me up, girl. Come in from the top row.
All right.
So I really just want to address Julius here when he's talking about Republican control. I just got one question for you, Julius. Hey, do you remember when Mark Dayton was in power and line item vetoed the budget for the legislature because he was so mad that Republicans went sideways on him, and he was just like, I'm just gonna strike your funding so you can't exist anymore? That's what happens when you're a Republican and you've got a modicum of control that the people of Minnesota have given you because they do want checks and balances. That's what happens when you get sideways from the state executive.
And
they try to line item veto your line item veto your budget so you cannot do your job that the people of Minnesota elected you to do, which was offer checks and balances. Do we remember when the Democrats had the trifecta a couple of years back? What did they do? They just bypassed Republicans completely. Didn't ask them anything, didn't include them in anything, because that is what happens when you have single party control for the last 20 years.
And that's what happens when you win elections. That's because voters picked us. And guess what? All the things that the Democrats did in the legislature during that cycle was popular.
Right.
It was popular.
You're absolutely right. Voters did choose that, and now they get to watch as Tim Walz and the Democrats get to raise their taxes while every single fraudster and their mother gets a brand new house, a brand new G-Wagon, a Land Rover, a Maserati, a couple of Ferraris, and Birkin bags for every Tom, Dick, Harry, and Janet. So that's the reality of the situation. If you think that at a time where folks are struggling to make ends meet, where the average home buyer for a first-time home is at 40 years old, no longer 20, no longer 30, but actually the first-time home buyer's average age is 40. You think when they look at that, when they go to the grocery store and see that a bag of groceries no longer costs $20 or $30, it doesn't even cost $40 or $50. It costs $60 to $70 for one bag of groceries. You think they're going to look at that, and then the fact that Tim Walz just allowed somebody to walk right into the state capitol, ask for money to go buy a Birkin bag and a G-Wagon and a brand new home in 5 different countries, you think they're going to look at that and be like, yeah, you definitely should be governor again. They're going to look at Keith Ellison and be like, oh yeah, you definitely should be attorney general again because you did such a great job prosecuting all these folks. Oh, wait, that wasn't you. That was Joe Thomas. Joe Thompson, excuse me, as the interim U.S. attorney. He wasn't the actual U.S. attorney. He was interim. He was just filling a role, biding his time until Trump actually chose somebody. Because that is how bad Democrats are at their job. Because they got complacent with 20 years of leadership. They got complacent. They thought they could spend taxpayer dollars however they wanted. They could throw it to anyone who wanted it, didn't have to ask questions. And now, well, frankly, the Roosters have come home to roost, and they've got a lot to answer for. And Tim Walz,
Roosters? You guys are still not polling better than the governor, the sitting governor, who you guys are trying to pin the whole the fraud on.
I'm sorry, none
of your candidates are beating them. None of your candidates are polling better. And Mike Lindell, who was in the race for 1 day, is the third runner-up in the MNGOP for the.
We'll get there.
Hold on, I just want to.
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. No,
I want to respond because you do a lot. You say a lot of stuff, and I want to just keep up with it. I want to just keep up. Here's what I have to say about what you just said right now. If your case to the voters of this state, by the way, when you guys held a majority in the House and the Senate from 2015 to 2018 and 2016 to 2022,
which got line item vetoed.
When you guys held the majority,
okay, Preya, let him go.
When you guys held the majority, you couldn't get anything done, even with the majority in both of those. Who cares if Mark Dayton line item vetoed it? Then go get some other votes. That's how governing works. That's what I'm hearing from you guys all the time. But again, I want to back up to something that's even more important right now. You have a fraud committee that was formed by the Republican Speaker of the Minnesota House, who's running for governor, and the chair of it is her opponent. And her opponent, who is the chair of the fraud committee, went to KSTP and said, we actually haven't done a single thing about fraud in this state except have some hearings that are spotlighting what the Walz administration has done. I'm sorry, if you want to make the case to Minnesota voters that you can govern in this state, maybe you should actually do something when you control the House. You can't do anything. And guess what? Even in our worst state, even with the worst issue that Republican or Democrats have ever had in the state in the last 20 years, you still can't win. You lost. And when we had the trifecta, guess what happened? Everything Democrats passed was popular with independents. It was popular with Republicans. It did things for people like feed kids. And you guys are going to run on fraud? Make a case for governing. You can't. You haven't done it yet. When you had control of the House, while you have control of the House, the Speaker hasn't done anything except make this a political sideshow. And if you're going to run for the next year on trying to make this case about fraud instead of making governing about what you guys are going to do for the state to prevent that fraud, you're not making a good case now. And I'll finish with, again, and I said it already once, even after all of this has come out, every single candidate that is running against Tim Walz on the Republican side is polling 5 points or more below him. You know why? Because even with some of the missteps, come on, Becky. Even with some of the missteps that the governor has made, some of them big, like the fraud situation, you're not going to find me defending him. What I am going to say, though, is he's taking steps to fix it, something that Republicans haven't while they have leadership in the House, is none of them can beat him because he has proven to the people of this state that even through situations as difficult as this, he's a better he governs better than any person on the Republican side. And if your leading candidate is Kendall Qualls, oh my God, please. They're going to have a field day with that guy. Lisa Damith can't make the case. Kristen Robbins can't make the case. No Republican can make the case. Like I said, and I'll end with this. The Star Tribune article gave very clear steps and actionable things that the governor has done already and is going to do as he can. And Republicans haven't done a single thing except have these hearings about, oh, this is what's happening in the state regarding fraud. But you haven't done anything. Propose some damn bills. And it all comes down to the point of Republicans, if they were smart enough, would force Democrats to vote against oversight that the legislator can have over these, agencies that have had these fraud allegations or have proven to have issues with fraud. But they won't do it because they know they're going to lose because everything that they've proposed doesn't work. Because they haven't proposed anything. It's tomfoolery for me to hear all of this. You guys still can't win a statewide race because you haven't done anything. And the governor has taken steps to address the fraud. Simple as that.
I just want to say one quick thing, and I promise I'll keep it short. Republicans don't need to make the case for governance. Excuse me, Julius. And you want to know why? Because Democrats are making it for us. Because Kelly Morrison is on the record today saying, if Tim Walz is the Democrats' nominee. Not when, if.
So
And that's all I need to know about his vulnerabilities when his own party doesn't even think he's going to be their nominee.
Thank you both. I think that this is one of my favorites when we get nice and spicy here. I will just, before I turn to Michael here, I just want to say that it was not until Julius's last comment that he actually said that Walz is not handling fraud. My question was about Walz and fraud, and you pulled the
I've
Walz
said
and
it before.
deflected and spun
No,
and
no,
pivoted.
no. I've said it before
That's
on
what
this
you
podcast.
spent your whole
Becky,
time
that's
doing.
not true. I've said on this podcast before, the governor has not done a great job of handling the optics of this, of handling the situation that we have had at hand. And by the way, we've known all about this. The only reason it's getting more attention is because the national media has decided to pick up a story that's years old.
My whole point.
Well, and again, your point is correct. I'm not going to deflect that. You have heard me time and time again say the governor has not done a great job of handling the optics of this situation. But guess what? In that time that this has become more of a story than it already was, he has taken actionable steps, and Republicans who control the House and hold the fraud committee in their sole possession has not done anything. Has Walz done good up until this point?
We understand that.
No,
So you believe that.
but he is doing better now. Believe it.
So
It's the
Tim
truth.
Walz only cares about fraud when the national media cares?
And
You guys don't
Time out.
care either. You haven't done anything since the story came out. You haven't
Julius,
done
you just
anything.
made my whole, that this is
No.
only getting attention now because of the national, is my whole kind of point of this conversation today.
On Republican
Because
side
I
too, right?
believe
Is that correct?
that the only reason we got this op-ed is because of the national government. I believe that the only reason a program integrity person was hired was because of the federal government. I believe the only reason that Walz this week said, I am the one to blame, is because of the federal government. None of those things, I don't believe, would have been done in the last week had it not been for the federal government. Michael, you have been very gracious to us in our time on this. I am dying to know your thoughts on the matter.
Well, I just absolutely love the conversation. It was fantastic, and it was just great. This has been action-packed. Here's what I will say. I supported Walz in 2022, and one of the reasons I talked about was because of the pandemic. And the argument that I made that I didn't believe that Walz had created the COVID situation, but he was reacting to it. And I viewed that Minnesotans viewed him as probably someone, they acknowledged that. They knew that he didn't create it, and he was reacting to something that was thrust upon the entire world. I got to say to you on fraud, I think the jury is still out on that. I think that it's up to debate right now as to what the jury will decide, the electorate will decide on who's responsible. I will say to you on something on this. I agree with, I think, all of the points that have made about the lack of response that have been done by the governor's office. I think he has mishandled it. I think that if it was not for the U.S. Attorney's Office and the prosecutions, this would not be the issue that it is. And I think it took a long time for it to get some attention. I will also say that the Trump administration has done a lot to draw attention to the fraud that's here. Here, I think, is the problem for Walz on fraud. Unlike COVID, when he ran for re-election in 2022, it largely had subsided, and we were dealing with the after effects of people thinking he may have gone too far and our interpretations on a whole variety of things. I believe it's very likely that what we know about fraud is going to get worse because more people are starting to look at it now. We now have someone who was appointed to be kind of, in essence, a fraud czar by the Walz administration, who's got, as we discussed last week, Becky, some pretty solid bona fides. The federal government is turning things up, and there's no reason to think that the new U.S. attorney who's there, Daniel Rosen, is not going to continue that. I think it's very likely that over the next, 11 months, 10 months of the election, 11 months, that it's going to get worse, that we're going to hear more things, and this drip is going to continue. Because I think that they have not really kind of plugged the leaks. It's still going to get worse, because when you start to focus on this and pay attention, it starts to get worse. What I think Republicans, not national Republicans, need to do, because I think they're doing a lot. I think the Trump administration is doing a lot. I think the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I think the opportunity exists for Republicans running for office, is that Walz now has a plan. And we discussed this a bit last week, Becky, that the debate now is on the plan. And who has the better plan and who can do some of this stuff. I do think now is the time for Republicans to have a solid plan and alternative to what is going on. And I think that's where I think we'll get litigated, because I think the debate is going to be is whether, and it's something Becky and you and I discussed, is we had kind of laid out this analysis of if the governor is doing something historic, which he is seeking a third 4-year term, that you and I kind of said the election gets to be about him. Are you happy with the previous 8 years and that record? The fraud issue is going to be something that he's going to deal with. And so I don't believe that we're really ahead of it, because I think the federal government is still plowing ahead. Becky, we did a show last Friday. It's Tuesday today. Look at how much news has come out since then. It's continuing to drip. And so the problem that Walz is in right now is that A, his solution has to work, his plan has to work, and B, here's the other downside. Everything that is found by this fraud czar is going to be a reflection on his administration. And so I think the fraud issue is not going to go away. I think it is incumbent on Republicans who are running for office statewide. And I think it presents that opportunity. Candidates for governor, attorney general, a state auditor, and those three candidates surely have to come up with substantive detailed plans on fraud that are actionable plans. They cannot simply just point out the problem, because what Walz has done is now he has a plan. The debate should be what's the Republican plan? What's the Republican response? But I still think that this issue is not going away. And as I said last week, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I thank you for that. I agree. I'm also going to ask for a joint deep breath from all of us. I got very fiery on that. It's obviously one that I think probably with you two, we're going to continue to talk about. We don't have time to get into the ins and outs of this Walz op-ed. I will say, I think that Republicans are going to read it with one mindset and Democrats are going to read it with another. I think that there are so many things I want to say and quotes I have highlighted and in my notes underneath, but it is what it is. We don't have time for it. I do want to turn our attention to 2026 and the governor's race that we do have. This is something that we know. I talked a little bit last week that I think that going into a third term, Walz needs to make the case for competency, a strong, stable, solid hand at the wheel, something that I think fraud has potential to derail for him, and that time will tell. Obviously, even with derailing Walz, Republicans still need to do, like Michael said, get themselves into a position of having a candidate, unifying behind a candidate, getting that candidate over the finish line, something we have not done, much to Julius's point, for the last 2 decades. I will say that I do think that this is probably our best shot at it that we've had in the last 2 decades. I think we have, again, if it is Walz, a vulnerable governor who does not necessarily have the backing of the majority of Minnesotans for a third term, let alone issue policy stances aside. So we have that at play. But we know that the Republican Party itself is not the robust functioning party unit that the Democrats have in the infrastructure to go in. We know that Trump's endorsements at play. There's so many different things. I want to start here, chat briefly about the straw polls that we had over the weekend. It is state central, so we take that for what it's worth. About 300 individuals at the state central. I want to start mainly with Preya about reactions of surprise or not. We know that Mike Lindell got in the race, so I'm going to read your quote because you were in the Star Tribune. I expected Lindell to get in the top 2. He did not. He came in 3rd. But in Preya, you responded in the Star Tribune saying, we literally have Democrats handing us what I would argue is the greatest controversy to run against in the last 20 years. But if Lindell is the nominee, Walz is a third-term governor. I would like you to extrapolate on that a little bit. And did you expect him to place above 3rd at State Central?
I actually did. I'm not surprised at the outcome of State Central at all. I think just from listening to folks in state, I kind of expected Kendall to come out on top with the amount of delegates that he had. I'm not surprised by Damon's placing either, especially with Ryan Wilson on the ticket with her. I think combined together that they do have a strong showing. And as bottom tier candidates drop off and the field concises a little bit. I think that'll be very interesting to see as well. Mike Lindell doesn't surprise me at all, just because, I mean, Royce White endorsed him, and that just tells you all you need to know about the type of delegates and voters that he naturally pulls in. Walz will be a third-term governor if Mike Lindell is at the top of the ticket, especially since he will be forming a slate with Royce White. It's just a matter of time before it comes out. But also, I think it sets the party back 10 years in terms of development. As I had said at the time, when you look at our party, Democrats did a very good job of holding up the blue wall at a time where the states around us fell. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that the Dakotas were voting blue. Indiana, Obama won in 2008. Iowa and Ohio, even though I don't claim Ohio as a Midwest state, but that's a whole nother conversation. Ohio and Iowa were swing states in 2016 during the presidential election with Trump, and he changed the map in a lot of ways. Now Wisconsin and Michigan are those battleground states in return. But the map in the Midwest, which was a solid blue wall for Democrats, where they could count on farmers and laborers to throw their support because they were generational Democrats. That no longer exists, but Democrats did a very good job here in the state of Minnesota of holding that blue wall because we were a weak party, because we could not figure out, like other state parties around us, how to build a coalition that stands the test of time. I think if a Mike Lindell comes out of the nominations process, he will be the candidate, mainly because, as I learned the hard way, in a primary, the endorsed candidate always wins. We have not elected a non-endorsed candidate in the primary since 1990. I don't envision that's going to change anytime soon. If Mike Lindell is the candidate, big donors that still have a modicum of faith in Minnesota Republicans and giving them shot, I think that goes away automatically. And that means national support goes away as well. They're not going to give Minnesota the time of day. And to build that back up, to get the kind of investment in the infrastructure that we had when Trump was running in 16 and 20, to get that back into place, that's going to take time. That's going to take resources, and that's going to take smart people to build on that, to build that infrastructure. And frankly, there's nobody that I see in the state right now that's willing to do that. And so it really does depend, I think, on electing good candidates and putting up a good slate that can fight against a very weak Tim Walz, because not only is he weak because of the fraud situation, but he also is dealing with the curse of being on a presidential ticket that didn't win. As we saw with Amy Klobuchar last cycle, even though she only spent like $500,000 of her own money running against Royce White, she did have a smaller margin of victory compared to any other election that she had. And Tim Walz became more vulnerable because he had to shed the Oshchucks Midwest dad vibe that he had going for him for like the last 20 years and really embrace the far left in order to be a comparable ticket with Kamala Harris. And he had to open his mouth and say a lot of things that he never said when he was in the state of Minnesota. And that in of itself gives Republicans a lot of ammo, but makes them more vulnerable in the state as well, in addition to just all the different things that are going on. The fact that Democrats aren't even confident in his candidacy for a third term, except for maybe Julius over here, who thinks he's still got a shot, I think at the end of the day is laughable. Becky's absolutely right when she says that Tim Walz is at the weakest he's ever been. There's a lot going against him, and if we don't put up the right candidate, we should say goodbye to any future investments for at least a decade.
Julius, I want your input. And now I'm going to say this with, obviously you don't come from the Republican side of the aisle in terms of this category of individuals, but I want you to kind of objectively look at the results here of the straw poll. You made it very clear that Kendall Qualls is not somebody that you think is a threat. I will point out, according to Blois's morning take, that most GOP candidates who have won the straw poll since 2010 have not gone on to be the Republican nominee. So it's not necessarily the first step into that. But what is your take with the first two here, Kendall Qualls, Lisa Damath, encompassing over 50% of those delegates at state central votes and going on down the line?
Right. First of all, I've got to say two things. One, Becky, I love when you're fired up, and I love when it's me that does it. I think it's been me every single time, and it's an honor. It truly is. I think we're also reading way too much into the Kelly Morrison language, but that's a conversation for a different day. What I will say, though, about the straw poll is, like, listen, man, There's a very clear and distinct difference between the two parties at the moment and what has separated them in statewide elections for a very long time. And the biggest part is we can get our stuff together and you guys can't. And but what I mean by that is, listen, I know Preya believes that everyone thinks Tim Walz is not going to run again or drop out or whatever the case might be. But Democrats, we're standing behind our candidate 110%. And if whether in the Senate primary it's Peggy or Lieutenant Governor Flanagan or Representative Craig, we're going to stand behind our candidate. And the difference between these two parties is our infrastructure is better. Like, we're blue no matter who. You know, I mostly go by that unless it's like a crazy lefty like DS Air. But for the most part, we have our stuff together because we're unified. Whatever you want to think about Tim Walz, we're going into this election riding with him until he says it's otherwise. And we have a track record to point to, whether it's good or bad. You can say, listen, this is what we've done as Democrats in this state, and here's what Republicans haven't. When I look at the straw poll, though, right, what's really fascinating to me, and like, I guess, you know, everyone kind of has the same opinion here. They weren't surprised by Lindell coming in, you know, in the third or wherever he came in, is he didn't spend a day of campaigning. He hasn't even spent a day of money when he got that poll, like when they did that straw poll. I don't even know if he was there. Obviously, I was there, so I wouldn't know. But I don't know if he was there, but I don't know if that made a difference. But the difference between the Democratic Party and Republican Party right now is the activist base that decides the endorsement process. Kristen Robbins came in behind Philip Parrish, who's like a perennial candidate. Kendall Qualls is a perennial candidate, right? So like the fact that these like very accomplished legislators who are women, who have an ideological case to be made against Democrats this election cycle, are second and then like sixth or seventh in the polls, is just an indication to me of how unserious the Republican Party is. Now, I will say, one of the things that you are correct about is any third-term governor, despite, let's just say the fraud isn't even a thing, is going to be weak going into a third election, right? Voters want change. They want to blame the bad things on the people that are in charge. And Walz generally should have a hard time already with that alone. Republicans, I would say, are actually in the best place they've ever been to maybe win a statewide race. That's why I think someone like Elliot Engen could probably win an auditor's race, because although, disclaimer, he's someone I admire. You know, I don't love all the things he does, but I think he's a good person. I know him personally, right? Like, you have the case to be made with the fraud about the auditor's race, right? You have a lot of cases to be made, maybe against Attorney General, if you put up a candidate that's good. But like, when I look at candidate quality in the MNGOP, the ones who are good never make it past. And it's been that way for a very long time. Michele Tafoya is apparently considering jumping into the Senate race. Representative Angie Craig has to be chomping at the bit to go against her in an election. Right. Well, so the point being, like, this poll, to me, this straw poll, although everyone wants to like disregard it, Kendall Qualls has been running for a long time. He's had a lot of time to talk to delegates. And I think he's going to do what he did again, like he did last time. He's going to get pissed off if he loses, and he's going to throw his delegates away from someone that could actually win. That's my personal opinion, and that's why I think like Minnesota Republicans are really actually in a good place and just can't get their stuff together, man. And we have, a month and a half till precinct caucuses, and then the board is really done after that. And, you know, Mike Lindell has a lot of money. He can run in a primary by himself without needing the money of the Republican Party. And I just think the cards are stacked against you when you have people like Mike Lindell, who comes with such a high name recognition, and all these candidates that are perennial. So
a few things about that. Mike Lindell actually said he does not have any money anymore, and he is going to need a fundraise because he had massive lawsuits against him. Yeah,
that's true.
But I will say a few things on this. I agree in part and disagree in part. I think that Michael and I have had extensive conversations about our lack of support of the endorsement process and the individuals who, the state central and the state convention and the folks, the delegates. Now, again, I say this every time because I think it's important. I came up in this system. I was a BPOU chair for 4 different districts. I love the endorsement until it obviously has been very broken. It's a chess match, and these folks are a specific type of voter and a specific type of individual who look for specific things from their candidates. It does not surprise me that Qualls took first. It did surprise me that Demuth took second, because I think historically, whether it's the state convention or even as we see it in federal government and in Congress, leaders typically are the ones that get the ire, the people are pissed at him, right? We saw it with Boehner kicked out. We saw it with Speaker Ryan kicked out. Anytime somebody steps into that leadership position, they're now the one that people want to be pissed at. So for her coming in second, I think is really impressive here, because I think a lot of times we saw it here when it was Kurt Doubt, when it was Paul Gazelka, the delegates did not like some of these really good, strong leaders that I personally do really like and respect. It is going to be obviously interesting. I wish we could do without the endorsement. I don't think that's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of conversation about this. Michael, before I go back to Preya here and before we move on to Senate, your final thoughts, because we talked about this last week and where we expected Lindell to come in among it all. What were your thoughts on the results?
I was not surprised where Lindell was. I put out some analysis midweek to remind people that since going back to 2000, going back for a couple of cycles, there's really any real information that comes out that can show that winning an off-year straw ballot is an indication of who gets endorsed. It was Gazelka previously, and then it was Matt Dean, and then it was Jeff Johnson, who did get endorsed, and then previously it was Marty Seifert when I was deputy chair. What's disappointing to me about the arrival of Mike Lindell is it just reinforces a narrative that Republicans in Minnesota love the opportunity to snatch a defeat from the jaws of victory. And that's what this is. And I am concerned immensely about his candidacy from the standpoint that it's not there's no I don't think he has broad support. He's right out of central casting in terms of being someone that the delegates will listen to. But I wonder sometimes since he's so well known and he has a ceiling, is that going to work against him? I don't know. The nightmare scenario for Republicans is a Royce White, Mike Lindell ticket at next year's state convention, meaning Royce White for U.S. Senate or Mike Lindell for governor, and then Katie bar the door. The Democrats have the trifecta. They win statewide, and I think they take control of both the House and the Senate. And that is the opportunity that Republicans have to understand right now. I think that there were some things, this is going to be real inside baseball, but there were some dumb things done at State Central on Saturday by some activists to change some of the rules for the endorsement process related to access on lists. I don't believe any candidate should abide by the endorsement, for it's broken, and there's even more reasons after Saturday. I hope all candidates agree to not abide by the endorsement because it's broken. It's a system that should not be supported. I will end on this, though, since we're short on time and I want to make sure everyone gets to speak, is that bad candidates can be helped over the finish line by good organizations. And so I want to remind people that bad candidates can lose because of bad campaign operations. This is not going to be a jury of 12 people that are going to sit intently in a room and decide whether Governor Walz should be reelected or not, in contrast with the Republican candidate. That's not the way it works. This is about building organizations and building machines. And the Republicans have to invest in an infrastructure that can compete with the Democrats. It would be great if that was around a candidate other than someone who is apparently registered to vote in Texas and showed up with an RV at State Central with Utah license plates. So that would be better than that. Run by a campaign manager who lives in South Dakota, by the way. So that would be a better situation. If Republicans want to take this election seriously, they need to start taking seriously by building an infrastructure and rewarding candidates that deserve to be rewarded. And it's not Mike Lindell. The other thing I'd say is there's too many candidates in this race. The dream needs to die, and some of these candidates need to get out. Otherwise, we know how this is going to play out. And so Republicans start taking this shit seriously.
Preya, you look like you might have one last comment on this, or are you ready to move on to Senate?
Definitely ready to move on to Senate.
All right, well, let's make it quick here because, wow, we have we had chatted a lot today. So excited. Man, we are in an election year. So as Julius, as you mentioned, right now, to date, Republicans haven't had any credible big name candidates throwing their hat in the ring for U.S. Senate. We hear today or this week that Michele Tafoya, former broadcaster, podcaster, general big name amongst a lot of folks, but certainly over the last decade or so has been a little bit more vocal in Republican politics here in the state. She is toying with a run. She's kind of somebody that's name, like a Klobuchar, is always on the short list, right? For whatever may come up. It's not the first time we've heard of her, but it does seem like some steps have been made. Some folks are moving things, the needle a little bit along here. She has supposedly met with the NRSC last week or recently in Washington, D.C., and this week, because of this news, we saw Angie Craig release a poll that was conducted in July. So obviously something that they've been thinking about for quite a while, that shows that if it's Craig Tafoya, Craig wins by 4. If it's Flanagan Tafoya, Flanagan wins by 3. We can. I'll get a little bit more into that lately or here shortly. Michael, I'm going to turn things around and start with you on this. What do you think about Tafoya? Is she going to get in? Is she moderate but too moderate? Is she a Trump supporter but too much of a Trump supporter? I think that there's a lot that comes with her as a candidate. But first off, do you think that she is going to run for U.S. Senate?
I don't know, but I don't know that she would be a good candidate, and here's why. I'm interested by someone who is pro-choice and also didn't want Donald Trump to run for president. Republicans, I want to remind our listeners of something. The Republican Party, as much as people want it to change, is a pro-life party. I am not aware that Republicans have ever knowingly endorsed someone who is pro-choice for statewide office. And when I say knowingly, Republicans endorsed Judy Dutcher in 94 and in 98 for state auditor without asking her position on abortion, and she was pro-choice. And so Republicans, this is a pro-life party. Tafoya's position, she is pro-choice. She also staked out a claim, which I think is a bit unusual, which is she went out there and said in the lead up to the 24 race, Donald Trump shouldn't run. And that didn't work out for her. And so one of the things I will say that I think Tafoya is she is what I would like to call kind of an intellectual or commentary cul-de-sac, and where she just is kind of spinning around. And she was Scott Honors and Matt Burke's campaign co-chair. There is a lot of information and target-rich environment about Michele Tafoya's commentary and analysis. And I will just say, from my perspective, Michele Tafoya does not seem to be both a very introspective person, meaning someone who wants to be self-aware of their own shortcomings, and she simultaneously a lot of time wants to act like she's the smartest person in the room. Now, I don't think all of the things I say make her necessarily a good candidate, but we'll see. At this late in the game, I don't see how she overcomes those hurdles in a race. What I have heard, that she's, got a podcast, great opportunities. I just struggle with, in this day and age, how you come in and try to run in any type of capacity as someone who is pro-choice in a pro-life party. And I think her position on Trump, is problematic. I mean, she was very vocal about not wanting him to run. Now, as someone who didn't support Donald Trump, I understand that path. But the difference is I'm not seeking the nomination for the United States Senate. And that's where I think this exercise is going to be. And so we'll see what she does. But anything that can stop Royce White, I'm a fan of. But I don't know that this is the right spot.
Preya.
I kind of agree with Michael a little bit in the sense that I don't actually know that she does run. Becky, you kind of made the point of, she's perennially named as a candidate, as the ideal candidate to run, and for a lot of different reasons, right? She has national name ID. She'll be able to pull in national fundraising. She's very well spoken. Obviously, she's a woman, so that's a huge plus in an election. I do think that there are some issues that obviously any candidate that has to deal with, but I just don't see what's in it for her to make this step, right? Like, Republicans are still, like, even with weaknesses, are still heading into an uphill battle. Not super steep, but it is a little bit of a climb, knowing that you are going to have to fight an incumbency of party leadership that's been intact for 20 plus years. She has a lot of great things going for her, just from a national standpoint, a personal standpoint, from an employment standpoint, things that she will probably have to give up in order to run for office. Is that worth giving up to run for office and maybe win, maybe not win, depending on what governor and the rest of the ticket looks like. I mean, if she's the only candidate with Mike Lindell as a governor and whatever else, like, that's not a great position to be in. And so I just think that there is a lot of risk for someone like a Michele Tafoya to take in order to run. And I hate saying that because I want good candidates to win. To echo Michael's point, anyone that can take out Royce White is a great candidate, and like, they have full support. But also, when we are dealing with the situation that we are dealing with within our party, it does give me pause to say, why here, why now?
The one thing I will say about her is, and I don't mean this in a negative about her, I think a lot of candidates do run because of ego, because they do believe that they can make a difference. This is something, Tafoya first really stepped out in 2014, supporting Scott Honor. She was the host of McFadden's Hospitality Suite at the state convention, had to get NBC's approval for that, something that she really stepped out and put herself on a limb. And so, one of the reasons, story goes, it is why she left her role in broadcasting, is because she wanted to be more politically vocal. So I do think there's an itch there that she wants to scratch. I do think that that's something that she's been, trying to elevate her name and her voice, and really trying to get her points across. And hey, I'm a pro-choice Republican. I can really appreciate somebody being vocal against Trump, being pro-choice. I think we saw or heard in 2022 that she was potentially going to be tapped as an LG candidate. And then folks, found out about delegates found out about the pro-choice thing, and it was kind of a squash there. So I think in this day and age, with the endorsement as strong as it is, and with the inability of Republicans to bypass that and be successful in the primary, I could see her waiting for another cycle to come around, not necessarily for Senate, whether that is for a spot in an administration or running for governor or a different seat itself, because open Senate seats only come around once in a blue moon. But I do think that there is that desire for her. I do think that she kind of wants it. Is just the environment. Is it friendly enough? Is it what she wants to wade into? Time will tell. Michael, you have a thought there?
What I just wanted to say, when you mentioned the abortion subject, one of the unique positions that Tafoya has taken, she's gone out and messaged a bit on abortion, and the message has been, don't worry about it. It's okay. It's not an issue. I don't think that that's a way to speak to pro-life activists inside the party. And I think that's her style, her leadership style, and the issues that she's taken. She was mentioned as a potential candidate for Kendall Qualls and at the state convention, and that sent things kind of awry. She was Jensen and Burke's co-chairs. And so what she spent the last election cycle in 22 doing is recirculating and repurposing all of those horrific comments that those candidates made. And the difference, I will say, in that is Jensen has come around and acknowledged, because of him running again and because he kind of was out there as the candidate, that some of those comments were commentary and takes were a bit wrong. Tafoya doesn't do that. And so she has basically all of the bad kind of baggage that comes with campaigns, because she's taken these roles and then she's out there commentating on things. I will say, without mentioning names, that it is easy to go through the archives of podcasts and other discussions and twist things in a particular way. And that is also the damage, is I think that Tafoya has such a voluminous amount of material that I just don't know if she is self-aware of her own political liabilities. And I think it's important that a candidate have that, and I just don't know if I see that.
Julius, anything to close us out on your thoughts on if she's going to run and what you and Democrats think?
Yeah, I'll be really quick with my thoughts. I mean, you have Peggy Flanagan, who's raised, at least from the last numbers I've seen, like $2.5 million. You have
Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, damn it.
Okay, well, for the purposes of this, yes, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. You have Representative Angie Craig, who won by 14 in a competitive district and has had $50 million in attack ads spent against her, and she's won by more every time, who's raised almost $5 million. $50 million of attack ads since she started running for Congress. But here's what I'll say. The last numbers I've seen from her was over $4 million raised. There's a month and a half to precinct caucuses. The Republicans have no serious candidates in. And the reason that someone like Michele Tafoya is likely so high in polls with that were released by the Craig campaign is because of name ID. But like Michael said, the moment that you start to put her up against some of this stuff that she said, some of the things she's been associated with, you're going to see how quickly that's going to drop, especially in a state like here, where the reality is like cash is king and Republicans don't do a good job of fundraising here. And I can't really see a world in which maybe the NSR or NRSC invest unless Tafoya gets in. But it's the state of the Republican Party, right? Like when we have this conversation from the outside perspective, someone will be like, well, she's a great candidate. Why wouldn't she be? Everyone knows who she is. But then when you start to dig into it, it's just like, does the Republican Party actually have a serious candidate to put up against some serious fundraisers on the DFL side? And I would say my thought process is, and I don't know this firsthand, is that both candidates on the DFL side, like I tweeted actually today or yesterday, it would be foaming at the mouth to run against her. They would. I just really don't see a world in which Republicans take the Senate. I think Minnesota Republicans have to work on candidate quality before they even start thinking about taking some seats from Democrats. And like the other part is, and this is maybe a conversation for another time, how do you get people to invest in these races? Plenty of these NSRC, NRSC, whatever, and the Republican governors associations, they don't invest in these races because they don't see them as winnable. And what is the key to getting them to invest? I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's Michele Tafoya. So,
well, I will tell you what the key is actually doing the work. I mean, it is something that when I was a campaign manager for one of the top tier congressional seats for Jason Lewis, who did lose to Angie Craig, you have to go make the pitch. You have to go in there. They only have a certain amount of numbers or money. They only have a certain amount of places they can play. You have to make the pitch that you have the infrastructure, that you have the messaging, that you have the team put together from pollsters and digital to website to grassroots. I mean, you have to make that pitch. And so while the NRSC is certainly, and these groups and committees go out and vet and try to get their candidate in, that does not mean that they're going to be spending substantial amount of money. It's going to then be up to her to we put together a 50 slide deck to go in and pitch to them why as an incumbent. And this is not unique to Jason Lewis. It's any candidate that's in the top tier or even that secondary tier on both sides have to go to their committees and say, here is why we need you and here's why you need me. And so right now they're probably wooing her. She would have to woo right back. I mean, and so Republicans just struggle right now to have a candidate that's wooable and willing to make that argument to these national organizations, because again, they only have so many seats. And while an open seat is certainly attractive, a lot of other states have better candidates, have better infrastructures, have better messaging and less to go up against than somebody like we've discussed, that the messaging that might be an issue here. So we'll find out. It sounds like early next year is when she would make an announcement, if she does make an announcement. So I am really excited. We are just weeks away from 2026. This was super, super exciting. Thank you all. Before we end, we have to do our little conversation about football. I gained one more on Michael this week. I am only down by 2. Michael is sitting comfortably in second place, 2 points behind first place, and 2 points ahead of myself and Julius, who are tied for third. So it is going to come down to these final weeks here. Super excited, super pumped, and I'm coming for you. It's been a slow slog along the last couple of weeks here, but coming for you, Michael.
I'm kind of maybe a little bit worried. I'm a little bit worried. But I want to just end by saying this. We are about to pass the longest episode, aside from the live shows where we've done on election night, which are around 7 hours, that we've ever had in the breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. You two have been remarkable today, and especially so has Becky. Just in facilitating this. This was a marathon episode. And I just want to thank you all, because it was just a blast to sit back and observe it and listen. So I want to thank you, Julius, thank you, Preya, and of course, Becky, for all of the work that you've done. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this marathon episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at @BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.